They said the silence of the high peaks was a holy thing, a presence, not an absence. She had never believed it. To Anya, silence was a medium, a carrier wave for data. It carried the whisper of barometric pressure shifts, the subsonic sigh of snowpack settling on a distant cornice, the precise Doppler shift of a raptor's cry that told you the wind speed at 200 meters. Here, on the precipice of what was supposed to be a new life, standing on a stone veranda overlooking the jagged teeth of the Altan Range, the silence was simply a canvas, and she was listening to the brushstrokes. The air, thin and cold enough to feel like a separate state of matter, smelled of granite dust, ancient ice, and the faint, resinous perfume of the dwarf pines that clung to the cliffsides. It was a clean smell, an analytical smell. It was the scent of home, though not the home she was trying to build today. The dress was an encumbrance, a cascade of ivory silk and lace. It felt less like a garment and more like a foreign topography she had to navigate. The delicate fabric snagged on the rough-hewn wooden railing of the lodge balcony, and the sensation was a low-grade irritant, a signal lost in the noise of the day. Her focus was outward, always outward. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a storm, scanned the opposing ridgeline, a brutal slash of metamorphic rock called the Serpent's Spine. She traced the military crest, the natural fall of the land, identifying potential hides and dead ground. She cataloged the thermal updrafts rising from the sun-warmed rock faces, calculating their potential effect on a projectile's trajectory over a 2,000-meter span. It was an unconscious process, a form of cognitive breathing. She had spent a decade training her mind to see the world not as a place to live, but as a series of interlocking physics problems waiting to be solved. A problem of ballistics, of terminal velocity, of the transfer of kinetic energy. "You're 1,000,000 miles away," a voice said, warm and close. David. He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. He was solid, real, his presence a welcome anchor in the sea of her own analysis. He wore a simple dark suit, the formality of it at odds with the untamed wilderness that surrounded them. He was a geologist, a man who understood the slow, inexorable pressures that shaped worlds. He thought in epochs and strata. She thought in microseconds and muzzle velocities. He saw the serpent's spine and saw 1,000,000,000 years of tectonic uplift. She saw a firing solution. "Just admiring the view," she replied, her voice a practiced calm, a placid surface over unfathomable depths. She turned her hand in his, the unfamiliar weight of the simple gold band on her finger, a constant physical reminder of the promise she was making. A promise to be here, not there. To be Anya, not Spectre. "It's our view now," he said, smiling. He followed her gaze to the ridge. "Schist and gneiss, mostly. See that folding? That's the pressure of 2 continents colliding. Beautiful, isn't it?" "Beautiful," she agreed, though her definition was different. The beauty she saw was in the unforgiving geometry of the place, the way it offered both perfect concealment and a perfect field of fire. It was a place of absolutes, and she had always been more comfortable with absolutes than with the messy compromises of human emotion. The wedding was small, intimate, held at this remote mountain lodge because they both loved the isolation. It was a neutral ground, a place where her past could not easily reach, or so she had hoped. The low thrum of rotor blades shattered the quiet. It was a discordant sound, a mechanical intrusion into the organic whole of the mountains. Anya didn't need to see the aircraft to identify it. A UH-60M, its turbine whine and rotor wash signature as distinct to her as a fingerprint. It was flying a low, aggressive approach, hugging the terrain, not a transport flight, a tactical insertion. Her body went rigid, a cascade of conditioned responses firing through her nervous system. Her breathing shallowed, her heart rate dropped into the focused rhythm of the zone, and the world sharpened, colors becoming more vibrant, sounds more distinct. David felt the change in her instantly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Garrison patrol," she said, forcing a casualness she did not feel. "They like to buzz the lodge, remind everyone who owns the mountains." The Black Hawk didn't buzz them. It landed, its skids settling onto the lodge's helipad with a practiced precision that spoke of a high readiness unit. The side doors slid open and 4 soldiers in full combat gear disembarked, their movements economical and sharp. They established a perimeter, their rifles held at a low ready, their eyes scanning the terrain with a professional paranoia. The last man to step out was not in combat gear. He wore a crisp, starched uniform, the brass on his collar glinting in the high-altitude sun. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains, all hard planes and sharp angles. Major Kalin, commander of the regional garrison, a man whose reputation preceded him, a dull instrument in a world that required scalpels. Kalin strode from the helipad toward the lodge, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He moved with an unearned certainty, the swagger of a man who confused authority with competence. His eyes swept over the small wedding party gathered on the veranda. David's parents, Anya's few friends from her cover job, the officiant, and his lip curled in a faint, dismissive sneer. He was a hammer, and everything here looked like a nail that did not belong. His gaze landed on David. He ignored Anya completely, as if she were part of the scenery, a decorative flourish he had no time for. "Dr. Evans, I presume." Kalen's voice was a low rumble, a sound designed to command and intimidate. "Major Kalen, Sector Command. I was not informed of this gathering." His tone made it an accusation. David, ever the diplomat, stepped forward, extending a hand. "Major, a pleasure. We filed all the necessary permits with the civilian authority. It's my wedding day." Kalen ignored the outstretched hand. "The civilian authority does not dictate military movements in a restricted zone, Doctor. Your gathering presents a security variable I am not comfortable with. This is an active operational area. The serpent's spine is a contested border." He gestured vaguely toward the ridge with a gloved hand. "My men are running patrols up there as we speak." Anya remained silent, her posture relaxed, but her mind a furious engine of calculation. She observed Kalen's stance, the slight tremor of ego in his voice, the way his men studiously avoided looking at him, instead focusing on their sectors of fire. A unit that feared its commander more than the enemy was a flawed unit. She cataloged the major's equipment: standard issue sidearm, poorly seated in its holster, a high-end GPS unit on his vest that was still coated in a thin layer of dust, indicating it was for show, not for use. He was a creature of the command tent, not the field. "We have no intention of causing any trouble, Major," David said, his patience wearing thin. "We'll be gone in 2 days." "See that you are," Kalen grunted. His eyes finally fell on Anya, a slow, appraising look that was utterly devoid of respect. He took in the wedding dress, the quiet stillness of her posture. He saw a woman, a civilian, a soft liability. His gaze lingered for a moment, then dismissed her. It was a mistake he could not possibly comprehend the scale of. He turned his attention back to the formidable ridgeline, a frown creasing his brow. This entire valley is a tactical nightmare. Acoustic shadows, unpredictable wind shear. You civilians have no idea what you're sitting on. Anya felt a cold, quiet impulse to correct him. To tell him that the acoustic shadow he was worried about was actually an amplification corridor, caused by a concave granite face halfway up the eastern slope. That the wind shear was perfectly predictable if you understood the Venturi effect created by the two opposing peaks. But she held her tongue. Silence was her shield. Anonymity was her armor. To be underestimated was her greatest tactical advantage. "Major," she said, her voice even and low, devoid of inflection. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound of it made him turn, slightly surprised that she had presumed to address him. He raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," the word was laced with condescending formality. "Your patrols," she stated, not asked. "You have them on the ridge itself?" Kalen's face darkened, a flash of anger at being questioned. "My patrol schedules are classified information, ma'am." "That's a mistake," she said simply. The words hung in the thin, cold air. It was not a warning. It was a diagnosis, a clinical assessment of a flawed strategy. A flicker of disbelief, then fury, crossed Kalen's face. He took a step toward her, his entire posture radiating indignation. He was a man accustomed to automatic deference, and this quiet woman in a wedding dress was challenging his tactical acumen. "And what would you know about it? You're a geologist's wife enjoying the view. Stick to your rocks and flowers. I'll handle the security of this sector." He jabbed a finger toward the serpent's spine. "My men are professionals. They can handle a little wind." "The wind isn't the problem," Anya said, her gaze fixed on the highest point of the ridge, a jagged peak known locally as the Dragon's Tooth. "It's the silence. You're broadcasting your position. Every footstep on that loose scree, every radio click is being carried for miles. But the sound coming back to you is being distorted. You're in a sonic blind spot. You think it's quiet up there. It's not. You just can't hear what's coming." For a moment, Kalen was speechless. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. It was clear he didn't understand half of what she'd said, but he understood the tone. He understood he was being lectured. His face turned a deep, mottled red. "That is the most absurd armchair general nonsense I have ever heard. You have no idea what you're talking about." He turned to David, his voice a low growl of command. "Get your wife under control, doctor. This is a military zone. Her opinions are not required." He spun on his heel and stalked back toward the helicopter, his fury a palpable force. His men fell in behind him, their expressions unreadable behind their wraparound sunglasses. As the Black Hawk lifted off, kicking up a storm of dust and gravel, David turned to Anya, his expression a mixture of awe and alarm. "What was that?" "He's walking his men into an ambush," she said, her voice flat, all traces of the bride gone, replaced by the cold certainty of the operator. "And he's too arrogant to listen." The celebration, if it could be called that, resumed in a muted, uneasy atmosphere. The presence of the military had soured the air, a reminder of the harsh realities that lay just beyond the idyllic bubble of the lodge. Anya moved through the motions of her own wedding reception, a ghost at the feast. She smiled. She accepted congratulations. She danced with her new husband, but her senses were stretched taut, projected out across the valley, clinging to the cold stone of the serpent's spine. She could feel the flaws in Kalen's deployment like a physical ache. He had spaced his patrols too widely, relying on radio communication in a region notorious for signal bounce. He had positioned his overwatch element on a false crest, giving them a poor angle of observation into the deep ravines that cut into the ridge's northern face. He was using a textbook formation designed for rolling hills in a vertical environment that rendered it obsolete. He was fighting the last war, reading from a manual the mountains themselves could not read. She stood by the massive stone fireplace in the lodge's great room, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand. David was talking with his parents, trying to smooth over the bizarre encounter with Kalen. She watched him, a pang of guilt piercing her professional detachment. She had promised him a normal life, a life free from the cold, hard calculus of her other world. And on the very first day, that world had come crashing in, carried on the rotors of a Black Hawk and the blustering ego of an incompetent commander. A young lieutenant left behind by Kalen as a liaison, or, more accurately, as a babysitter for the civilians, approached her hesitantly. He was barely out of the academy, his face still holding the earnestness of a man who believed in the regulations. "Ma'am," he began, his voice respectful, "I apologize for the Major's directness. He takes the security of this region very seriously." "Seriousness and competence are not the same thing, Lieutenant," Anya said, her gaze still fixed on the window that looked out onto the ridge. The lieutenant stiffened slightly. "Ma'am, the Major is a highly decorated officer." "Decorations are for parades," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "They don't stop bullets." She took a slow sip of the champagne. The bubbles were a tiny, effervescent explosion on her tongue, a microcosm of the violence she felt coalescing across the valley. She could feel it in the air, in the way the light was starting to fail as the sun dipped behind the western peaks, casting the serpent's spine in a deep, ominous shadow. It was the hunter's hour, the time when predators moved. Suddenly, the lieutenant's radio crackled to life, the sound harsh and loud in the quiet room. It was a burst of panicked static, then a voice, strained and breathless. "Act under fire! Dragon's Tooth is compromised. Repeat, we are taking heavy, effective fire from everywhere. We can't see them. Sentry 2 is down. Sentry 3 is—" The voice cut out, replaced by the flat, empty hiss of an open channel. The crisis had begun. The lieutenant's face went pale. He fumbled with the handset, his movements clumsy with shock. "Dragon 1, this is Lodge Actual. Report. What is your status? Over." Only static answered. Every guest in the room froze, the festive atmosphere evaporating into a cold dread. David rushed to Anya's side, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "Anya, what's happening?" "They walked into it," she said, her voice a dead, emotionless monotone. She placed her champagne flute on the mantelpiece with a steady hand. The sound was a sharp, definitive click. The wedding was over. Spectre was on duty. The radio crackled again, this time with Kalen's voice, a furious, panicked roar that was a universe away from his earlier condescending calm. "All elements converge on Dragon's Tooth. Suppressing fire. I want air support now. Get me a gunship on station, damn it." A different voice, calmer but strained, cut in. "Negative, Command. We have zero visibility. They're using the ravines for cover. We fire blind. We're just giving away our positions. We're pinned down." "I don't care," Kalen bellowed. "Lay down fire. That's an order." Anya closed her eyes. It was a textbook failure of command. He was panicking, throwing resources away. ordering his men to commit suicide out of pure ego and fear. He was trying to solve a complex geometrical problem by shouting at it. The enemy, whoever they were, had chosen their ground perfectly. They were dug into the complex network of ravines and rockfalls on the north face, a place Kalen had dismissed. They had let his patrols walk past them, right onto the exposed spine of the ridge, and then they had opened up, firing from multiple concealed positions at once. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, executed with lethal precision in a three-dimensional battle space. Kalen's men were trapped on the high ground, silhouetted against the sky, with no cover and no clear targets to shoot at. Every muzzle flash from their rifles would be a beacon, drawing an immediate and accurate response. They were being dismantled. The young lieutenant was now frantically speaking into his own radio, relaying Kalen's increasingly frantic and contradictory orders to a command center miles away. He was a cog in a machine that was grinding itself to pieces. He looked up and saw Anya watching him, her expression unreadable, her stillness a stark contrast to the chaos erupting over the comms network. "He's going to get them all killed," she stated. The lieutenant flinched as if struck. "Major Kalen is in command," he said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. Protocol was all he had left. "Protocol is a suggestion, Lieutenant. The laws of physics are not," she replied. "Air support can't help them. The angle is too steep, and the enemy is dug in under rock overhangs. A frontal assault from the valley floor is impossible. They'd be climbing into a kill zone for hours. His men on the ridge are caught in a fatal funnel. Their only option is to break contact and fall back. But they can't, because he's ordering them to stand and fight a battle they have already lost." Her analysis was so swift, so cold, so utterly certain that the lieutenant could only stare. She spoke of his reality, the one unfolding in blood and terror a few miles away, with the detached clarity of a scientist describing a chemical reaction. What can we do?" he stammered, the chain of command dissolving in the face of her absolute competence. Anya's eyes drifted from the window to the lieutenant's sidearm, then to the M4 carbine slung over his back. They were tools, but not the right ones for this job. This was not a problem that could be solved with volume of fire. It was a problem that required a single, perfect application of force. A key for a lock, a scalpel for a tumor. "Where's the garrison's armory?" she asked. "Ma'am," he blinked, confused. "The armory," she repeated, her voice dropping, gaining a new and terrible weight. "I need a rifle, a real one, something chambered in .338 Lapua or larger, and a spotter scope. Now, Lieutenant." The moment hung in the air, thick with the static of the dying patrol's radio and the sheer magnetic force of her will. The young officer, trained his entire life to obey the rank on a man's collar, found himself utterly compelled by the authority in a bride's voice. He saw past the ivory dress, past the civilian facade. He saw the truth of her. He saw a commander. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice firm for the first time since the attack began. "Follow me." He turned and led her away, leaving a room full of stunned wedding guests and a bewildered husband who was just beginning to understand that the woman he had married was a stranger. Authority did not reside in the insignia on Major Kalen's collar. It resided in the calm, quiet center of the storm that was Anya. As she walked through the corridors of the lodge, following the young lieutenant, the silk of her dress whispering against the floor, a silent, almost imperceptible shift occurred. Command was not seized. It flowed like water seeking its own level, away from the panicked shouting on the radio and toward the woman with the impossible solution. The lieutenant, whose name was Reese, led her to a hardened storage locker in the lodge's basement, a small, forward-deployed cache for the garrison patrols. He keyed in a code, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside, the air smelled of gun oil and metal. Rifles were racked neatly, ammunition cans stacked in precise rows. It was a small arsenal, but a professional one. Anya's eyes scanned the racks, dismissing the standard-issue M4s and the squad automatic weapons. Her gaze settled on a long, heavy case in the corner. "There," she said. Reese followed her gaze. "That's an M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum." He hesitated. "It's designated marksman issue. No one here is even qualified." "I am," Anya said, cutting him off. She knelt, her wedding dress pooling around her on the concrete floor, and unlatched the case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the rifle. It was a thing of brutalist beauty, all matte black steel and polymer. She lifted it, the weight familiar and comforting in her hands. It was an extension of her own senses, a tool that could project her will across miles of empty air. Her movements were fluid, economical, a symphony of practiced efficiency. She checked the action, ran a thumb over the bolt, and sighted down the empty rail. "I need the optics case, the rangefinder, and a kestrel," she said, her voice sharp, issuing orders that Reese followed without question. He was no longer a lieutenant in Kaylin's army. He was her subordinate. He moved with a newfound purpose, retrieving the requested equipment. He handed her a Leupold Mark V HD scope, a box of 190-grain match-grade ammunition, and a Kestrel 5700 Elite weather meter with applied ballistics. She worked quickly, her hands a blur of motion. The scope was mounted and torqued to spec. She field-stripped the bolt, checking for any imperfections before reassembling it with an audible click. She loaded a magazine, the rounds seating with a satisfying precision. She was no longer a bride. She was an artist preparing her brushes, a surgeon laying out her instruments. David appeared at the doorway of the armory, his face pale. "Anya, who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She paused, her hand on the rifle's bolt. She looked at him, and for a fleeting moment he saw a flicker of the woman he loved, a shadow of regret in her stormy eyes. "I'm the person who is going to keep these men from dying," she said. The moment passed. Spectre was back in control. She turned to Reese. "I need a stable firing position." "The roof of the east wing. It has a clear line of sight to the dragon's tooth." "The roof," Reese started. "Ma'am, it's not fortified." "It's flat," she said, "and it's 2,140 meters from the primary target area. That's all I need." She slung the rifle over her shoulder. The contrast of the tactical weapon against the delicate lace of her dress was surreal, a collision of two irreconcilable worlds. She started for the door, then paused. The dress was a liability. With a single, decisive motion, she grabbed the hem of the expensive silk skirt and ripped it upwards, tearing the fabric to her knees, giving her legs the freedom of movement she required. The sound of tearing silk filled the small room. It was the sound of her old life being discarded. She climbed. Through the lodge's service corridors and up a maintenance ladder, she moved with the silent grace of a predator. Reese followed, carrying the spotter scope and ammunition. On the roof, the wind was a physical force, a constant, howling pressure. It tore at the shredded remains of her dress and whipped her hair across her face. The sun was almost gone, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple. The serpent's spine stood in stark relief, a wall of black against the dying light. Muzzle flashes, tiny, angry sparks, flickered along its crest. The sound of the battle reached them, a distant, popping cacophony, muted by the wind and distance. Anya ignored it all. She crawled to the edge of the flat roof, unslung the rifle, and deployed its bipod. She settled behind the weapon, her body becoming one with the cold, hard surface. She was an island of absolute calm in the midst of chaos. She took the kestrel from Reese and held it up, letting it acclimate, its small screen displaying a stream of data: wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. Wind is 7 miles per hour, gusting to 12 from 2 o'clock, she murmured, her voice almost lost in the gale. Temperature is dropping, 3 degrees Celsius. Pressure is 958 millibars. That's a density altitude of nearly 9,000 feet. She entered the data into the kestrel's ballistic calculator, along with the rifle's specific profile and the ammunition data. The machine spit out a firing solution, an impossibly complex calculation of gravity, wind, spin drift, and the Coriolis effect. "Reese," she said, her eye now pressed to the scope. "Talk to me. Who is in command on the ridge?" Reese, lying beside her, put his radio earpiece in. "It's Sergeant Markison, 1st Platoon. Kalen is back at the temporary command post at the base of the valley, directing things from a screen." Of course he was. "Get me Markison," Anya commanded. Reese hesitated for a second, then complied. He was violating every rule of communication protocol. He didn't care. "Dragon 1, this is Lodge Actual. I have a consultant for you. Stand by." He handed the headset to Anya. "Sergeant Markison," Anya's voice was calm and clear over the radio, cutting through the static and panic. "My name is Anya. I am on the lodge roof. I have a rifle. I am your overwatch now. Do you copy?" There was a pause, then a strained, incredulous voice came back. "Lodge Actual. You have a civilian on the net. Who is this? We are in the middle of a firefight." "I am the person who can see your enemy, Sergeant. You cannot. They are using the natural fault lines in the rock as firing trenches. There are at least 3 heavy machine gun positions, designated Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Alpha is at the base of the main peak, hidden by a granite overhang. Bravo is 200 meters to your west, in a V-shaped ravine. Charlie is above you, near the summit. They have you in an interlocking field of fire. You are experiencing plunging fire from Charlie and grazing fire from Alpha and Bravo." The silence on the other end of the radio was profound. In 30 seconds, a woman's voice from 1.5 miles away had given him a more accurate picture of the battlefield than his own eyes had in 30 minutes of hell. How can you see that?" Markison stammered. "I'm not looking at you," Anya explained, her eye never leaving the scope. "I'm looking at the rock. I'm watching the supersonic trace of their bullets impacting the scree behind your positions. It's telling me their exact points of origin. Now, listen to me. I am going to take out position Charlie. The moment I fire, you will have a window of approximately 10 seconds before they reorient. In that window, you are to break contact and fall back to the western shoulder of the ridge. There is a small rock formation there that will provide you with temporary cover. Do you understand? Fall back? Command ordered us to hold our position." "Command is going to get you a posthumous medal," Anya said, her voice like ice. "I am giving you a chance to see tomorrow. Your choice, Sergeant." Another pause. Then, "We'll be ready." Anya drew a slow, steady breath. The world narrowed to the circular image in her scope. She wasn't looking for a person. She was looking for a physical disturbance, a heat signature, a subtle distortion in the air. The range was extreme. The wind was a fickle, treacherous enemy. She dialed the elevation turret on her scope. Click, click, click. The adjustments were massive, compensating for the bullet's dramatic drop over such a distance. Then she dialed the windage, a more nuanced, instinctive adjustment based on the kestrel's reading and her own feel for the shifting air currents. She found it. Not a man, but a puff of displaced dust and hot gas from a partially concealed muzzle. Position Charlie. She placed the fine crosshairs of her reticle on the spot, but she didn't aim there. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculation. She aimed high and to the left, into a patch of empty air, a place where the bullet would be in 30 milliseconds, a place where the wind would carry it and gravity would pull it down into a perfect lethal arc. Her breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale. The space between heartbeats widened, stretching into a vast, silent plain. In that silence, she found the perfect moment of stillness. Now. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a controlled, violent explosion. The sound was a sharp crack, immediately snatched away by the wind. For a moment, nothing happened. The bullet was in flight, a tiny speck of copper and lead on a journey of more than a mile, traveling faster than the sound that would follow it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 2.5. Through the scope, Anya saw a shower of rock dust and a flicker of red erupt from the spot she had targeted. Position. Charlie went silent. Shot out. Go! She snapped into the radio. On the ridge, Sergeant Marcuson didn't hesitate. Go! 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 Fall back to the western shoulder! He and his surviving men scrambled from their exposed positions, moving with the desperate speed of the reprieved. Bullets from positions Alpha and Bravo zipped through the air where they had been moments before. They made it to the rock formation, just as the enemy fire found their new location. Anya was already acquiring her next target. The enemy was smart. They knew their high ground advantage had just been neutralized by an unknown element. She saw movement near position Alpha. Someone of importance was repositioning, likely a commander. He was moving between points of cover, using the terrain, but he was predictable. She tracked his movement, anticipated his path. He would have to cross a small, open patch of ground to get to the next piece of cover. A 3-foot gap. At this range, it was the width of a hair. She did not have time for the kestrel. She held her breath, estimated the wind, and fired. The shot was an act of pure instinctual physics. The enemy commander, a dark shape against the gray rock, stumbled and fell, his forward momentum carrying him out into the open. Position Alpha's rate of fire faltered, becoming sporadic and uncoordinated. She had broken their command structure. Now for the final piece. Position Bravo. It was the most well-protected, dug into a deep crevice. A direct shot was impossible. But Anya wasn't looking at the position itself. She was looking at the massive, unstable rock formation directly above it. A geologic fault. A weakness in the ancient stone was visible even through her scope. David had called it beautiful. Anya called it an opportunity. "Reese," she said, her voice calm, "what can you tell me about the seismic stability of that overhang above position Bravo?" Reese, stunned into silence by the display he was witnessing, fumbled for a moment. That's a glacial deposit, a massive boulder left behind by the last ice age. It's sitting on a bed of loose shale. It's unstable." "Perfect," Anya breathed. She wasn't aiming for the gun, she was aiming for the mountain. She dialed her scope, took a deep breath, and fired a single, carefully placed round into the shale bed just beneath the massive boulder. The report of the rifle echoed across the valley. For a second, nothing. Then a low groan, the sound of 1,000,000,000 tons of rock shifting. The massive glacial deposit tilted, then slid, then fell. It came down in a slow-motion avalanche of rock and dust, a localized man-made landslide that completely obliterated Position Bravo, burying the gun and its crew under thousands of tons of rock. A profound silence fell over the serpent's spine. The battle was over. It had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable power of gravity, unleashed by a single, perfectly placed bullet. In the silence, Reese could only stare at the woman beside him. The wind whipped at her torn dress, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the tactical equipment. She looked like a goddess of war, something ancient and terrible summoned to this remote peak. She calmly ejected the spent casing from the rifle, the small piece of brass tinkling as it hit the roof. The radio crackled. It was Sergeant Markison, his voice filled with a stunned, reverent awe. "Lodge actual, targets neutralized, all of them. Who are you?" Before Anya could answer, a different voice cut in, overriding the channel. It was Major Kalin, his voice a mixture of confusion and fury. "What the hell is going on? Who authorized that action? Markuson, report! What just happened?" Anya took the headset from Reese. "Your men are safe, Major," she said, her voice flat and cold. "The threat has been neutralized. I suggest you send a medical team to retrieve your wounded." "Who is this?" Kalin demanded. "Identify yourself immediately. You are interfering with a military operation." The intervention came from an unexpected quarter. A new voice, crisp, calm, and carrying the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority, broke through the channel. The signal was clear, routed through a military satellite, bypassing the local network entirely. "That's enough, Major Kalin." A stunned silence fell over the net. Every soldier listening recognized the voice. It was General Madsen, the supreme commander of the entire Joint Special Operations Task Force. A man who operated at a strategic level so high that a sector commander like Kalin was barely a blip on his radar. "General," Kalin stammered, his bluster instantly gone, replaced by a terrified deference. "Sir, I was not aware you were on this channel." "I'm on every channel, Major." Madsen's voice was dangerously quiet. "And I have been monitoring your spectacular failure for the last 30 minutes. You disregarded sound intelligence. You walked your men into a textbook ambush, and you were about to order a gunship to fire on a compromised position, likely killing your own soldiers. You are relieved of command. Effective immediately." "Is that understood?" Kalin could only manage a choked, "Yes, sir." "Now," the general continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming less severe, almost conversational. "Put Operator Valerius on the line." Reese and Markison, listening on the open channel, heard the name and understood nothing. But Kalin, his face now ashen, felt a cold dread crystallize in his gut. He knew that name, not as a person, but as a legend. A call sign whispered in after-action reports and classified briefings. Spectre. The operator they sent in when armies failed. An asset so valuable, so secret, that her existence was officially denied. Anya took the headset. "General," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Spectre." Madsen's voice was warm, familiar. "I heard you were getting married today. My apologies for the interruption. It seems you had to work on your honeymoon. Just cleaning up a mess, sir, Anya replied. The area is secure. Kalen's surviving men are safe on the western shoulder. They have casualties. I'll have a combat search and rescue team there in 20 minutes, Madsen said. They will answer to you. Handle the extraction and the site exploitation. I want to know who those hostiles were. He paused. And Anya, congratulations on the wedding. My gift is in the mail. Thank you, sir, she said. Valerius out. She handed the headset back to Reese. The revelation settled over the scene, recontextualizing everything. The quiet woman in the wedding dress. The arcane knowledge of acoustics and geology. The impossible shots. It all snapped into focus with brutal clarity. Major Kalen had not just dismissed a civilian, he had insulted a living legend, a Tier 1 operator from the most elite unit on the planet. His career was not just over, it was annihilated. On the roof, Anya began to methodically clean her rifle. The ritual was grounding, the familiar scent of solvent and oil, a comfort after the storm of violence. The fight was over, but the work was not. She had to manage the arrival of the CSAR birds, ensure the wounded were triaged correctly, and oversee the initial intelligence gathering from the enemy positions. The bride was well and truly gone now, buried under the weight of duty. Down below, in the lodge, a new order had been established. The soldiers from the garrison, who had arrived with the extraction team, moved with a quiet efficiency, their awe for the woman on the roof palpable. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing up at the spot where she kept watch. They had a new commander, one whose authority was not derived from a piece of paper, but had been forged in the crucible of combat, demonstrated in 3 perfect shots. Kalen was a ghost, a non-entity, waiting in shame to be formally escorted from his own command post. Sergeant Reese finally found his voice. He approached her as she finished with the rifle, his movements hesitant, respectful. He did not offer praise or congratulations. He knew instinctively that such things were meaningless to her. Instead, he held out a canteen. "Ma'am," he said, "you should hydrate." It was a simple gesture, a soldier looking after a fellow soldier. It was the highest form of respect he could offer. Anya looked up, her eyes meeting his. She saw in his face not fear, but a deep, professional admiration. She took the canteen and drank. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. The word sergeant from her lips was not a simple acknowledgement of rank. It was a validation, a recognition of his own competence in the midst of his superior's failure. Reese stood a little taller. Later, after the wounded had been airlifted out and the first intelligence reports were sent, David found her on the same veranda where the day had begun. She had changed out of the ruined dress and was now wearing a set of borrowed fatigues that were too large for her. She stood staring at the serpent's spine, now silent and dark under a canopy of stars. He stood beside her, not touching her, leaving a small space between them. The silence stretched, filled with a universe of unasked questions. "Spectre," he said finally, the name feeling foreign and strange on his tongue. "It's my call sign," she said, her voice quiet. "It was supposed to be in the past. The way you handled that rifle, the way you talked on the radio. Anya, I'm a geologist. I study pressure. I've never seen anything like the pressure you were under up there. And you were calm." "It's what I was trained to do," she said. "The world breaks down into a series of problems. You find the variables, you control for them, you solve the equation. The pressure is just another variable. "Is that all it is to you? An equation?" he asked, a hint of pain in his voice. She turned to face him, and in the faint starlight, he could see the deep, profound weariness in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice softer than he had heard it all day. Today was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be the day I stopped solving those kinds of problems." She had arrived at this place a bride, seeking a quiet harbor from the storms of her past. But the storm had found her, and in the end, she had to become the storm to survive it. The extraction helicopters would be here for her soon, to take her away for debriefings and after-action reports. She would disappear back into the classified world she had tried to escape, her brief, violent reappearance already becoming a legend among the men of the Altan Range garrison. The story of the bride of the serpent's spine. The quiet woman who had defeated an army with a rifle and a ruined wedding dress. She was not a bride, not a wife, not in that moment. She was Spectre, a force of nature made manifest, a lonely, necessary protector whose quiet competence was the only authority that truly mattered when the silence was finally broken by the sound of gunfire.